2024 has been a year of transformation, innovation and resilience for the African continent. But here is a thought: what happens when a continent rich in diversity, resources and ingenuity decides not just to participate in the global narrative, but to redefine perspectives in terms of relations it has with the rest of the world? Today, we are diving into how Africa is not only shaping its future, but setting new standards for what's possible in a rapidly evolving world. Today's conversation is a story of vision, bold decisions, and a future that is undeniably African and for African people. How is Africa charting its course to greatness? Ladies and gentlemen, we shall be discussing this with our panel of experts this day. This is Talking Points over For You Media Africa. Stay with us. How is Africa shaping its future? Ladies and gentlemen, you're welcome to today's edition of Talking Point over For You Media Africa. It's always a pleasure to be in your company, and like we mentioned in our preamble, today we're evaluating all the gains and of course the lapses that were recorded all through this year 2024, be it in terms of leadership, be it in terms of economic development and otherwise, and we shall be having that conversation this day on Talking Point. Meanwhile, to unfold or open our panel of experts this day, first of all, the way from Kenya, we've been joined by Boniface Harrison, who is joining us this day in his capacity as the Executive Director of MUEMACTION Post. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Sharon. Yeah, it's always a pleasure to be in this program, and also it being almost the last program we're having in 2024. It's much pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for that, actually, for joining us. Meanwhile, we've equally been joined by Dr. Stanley FONGOD, who is a Pan-Africanist economist and, of course, joining us in his capacity as well as a fintech expert. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for having me, and thank my co-panelists for joining in and everyone who has participated with us. I think just like my co-panelist said, this should be our last program for the year, so it's quite exciting, and hopefully those who have been with us on this journey too will find it as exciting as well.
Exactly, like you mentioned, this is the last edition. We just got notifications that Dr. NJIX LAGOKE, joining us this day as a founding member of the Convention for Pan-Africanism and Progress, and doubles as the Associate Professor of History at Lincoln University. Thank you, nicely, sir, for joining us.
Yes, thanks for the opportunity, Sharon, and glad to be here with Stanley and Boniface.
True indeed, and we would not debut this conversation without equally acknowledging SHITTU FOWORA, digital news editor, joining us all the way from Nigeria. Welcome. To debut today's conversation, meanwhile, SHITTU is going to join us. I'd like to kickstart with you, Dr. NJIX. You are, like I mentioned, founding member of the Convention for Pan-Africanism and Progress. Now, haven't evaluated or gone through every aspect of what happened this year, 2024, from the positive aspects to some of the lapses that were recorded all through this year. What are some of the key milestones that Africa achieved all through 2024 that signifies its journey towards self-determination and global influence?
Okay, thanks for that question. I'm going to try and be brief. I think I can, my answer rests upon three major points. The first one is the democratic progress. If I can talk about the democratic progress, we saw the elections of the first female in Namibia, Malawi. We saw the first female vice president in Ghana. We saw the rise to power of Duma Buko in Botswana, who ended the leadership of the former ruling party, which was in power for over 50 years. And then in the case of Ghana, as I spoke about the vice president, we saw the return to power of John Mahamad Dramani, the former president of Ghana. And then with his many Ghanaians I spoke with said that they see that as the second independence is like as big as it was a huge moment. It was an expression of revolution through the ballot in Ghana. And they have a lot of hope, for what Mahamad Dramani may do in order to fix the economy of Ghana, which is in a bad shape under the leadership of the outgoing president, John Nana Akufo-Addo. We want to talk also about the election in Senegal with the duo Ousmane Sonko and Diomaye Faye, who came to power when people thought that it was over for Ousmane Sonko, because Macky Sall, the former president, was doing everything possible to seek the third term and then to prevent the rise to power of Ousmane Sonko. So all those elements, that is the like what can I say, the democratic progress on the continent of Africa. The second element, I'm going to talk about the election of Senegal, and I link that to the second topic, which is the resurgence of Pan-Africanism on the continent of Africa. I know the government of Togo, with the African Union, organized the 6 regional congresses or pre-congresses of the 9th Pan-African Congress, which was supposed to take place in Togo, but the regional congresses took place in South Africa, in Mali, in Brazil, Salvador Bahia for the diaspora, and some like in Tanzania, Congo, and in Morocco. And then we could see the mobilization of many around that project, while many others were organizing their own Pan-African gatherings. The theme of the 9th Pan-African Congress is about the reform of the international institutions, and that was also a major moment, which I link to Senegal. One, we saw that the Senegalese government decided to organize the 80th anniversary of the massacre, of the Tiaroy Camp massacre, in order to excavate the truth about what really happened, that truth which seemed to be controlled by the French. And then, of course, the Sahel state with ECOWAS and the issue of the economic sovereignty of Africa. And I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Dr. NJIX. Indeed, that was a little embodiment of just a recap of what happened all through this year, given we just, a step away from 2025. Now, moving forward with you, Dr. FONGOD, you listened to some of the points stated by your co-panelists, and I'll pick up from there. He stated Senegal, he stated the resurgence of Pan-Africanism across the African continent, and of course, the quest for sovereignty amongst some African states. With that said, how is Africa leveraging its young and dynamic population for them to be able to drive this innovation and economic growth, which we've seen, we saw all through this year across the African continent?
I think that one of the most remarkable things that has been happening on the continent of Africa will be the issues that we've begun to strengthen, some kind of a continental intertrade, arrangements, especially with AFTA. That in itself has been a little bit more encouraging, during this past year as we streamline the issues of custom duty processes. We've also been able to deal with the issues of technology, especially within the fintech sector, and also technology in agriculture. If you look at places like Kenya, there's been a lot of investments in tech in agriculture, and also in countries like Senegal. tremendous investments this year came in the agricultural sector, which is basically quite good. I think that we have also been able to make progress in terms of energy. If you look at what is going on in places like Morocco, there has been a lot of solar energy farms. Kenya is providing a lot of solar energy farms, especially, basically pushing forth for the green technology, and also trying to be able to make sure that, a lot of young people get into this sector by creating jobs as well. We have had a lot of financing in this area. There are a lot of banks on the continent of Africa that are beginning to think that it's quite important for them also to start investing in young people and invested in environmentally friendly projects that will basically enhance and protect our environment, not like most of those we find in spaces like Cameroon, which basically will fund anything as so far as, deforestation is concerned. We have to be able to make sure that we get ourselves into an environment where we start focusing primarily on making sure that we bring some kind of an increase in the kind of investments that is sustainable and the kind of development that basically protects the environment. I think that is something that is noteworthy for us on the continent of Africa to basically embrace. One of the things that I am absolutely interested and excited about is the fact that we have seen a lot of folks from the diaspora that are now beginning to engage the continent of Africa in areas of real estate technology and education. I've seen a lot of young people who are coming back onto the continent of Africa, basically working highly in the areas of education, doing a lot of things so far as agriculture is concerned. And then we have a lot of folks basically who are also sending money back home. Remittance is basically boosting a lot of economy on the African continent. And I think that that's something that we should be able to encourage. Secondly, in this particular sector, if there be anything else that should be added, I think that we have to find ways in which we begin to encourage the locals in each and every one of these countries, especially those who are in the diaspora, who are first-generation Africans out of the continent and who are part of these individual nations on the continent of Africa, to be able to find ways in which they can actually increase investment in these countries, because frankly speaking, we need it. I'd rather have them investing than us basically, going on this bandwagon where we continually just borrow and borrow and borrow. We can never borrow ourselves into prosperity. We have to be able to invest with what we have into prosperity. I think that those are some of the things that we can do. And lastly, I think that we have to be able to talk primarily on the issues of industrialization and trying to be able to get a lot of young people involved in at least finding ways in which we can be able to convert our, primary exports, which is basically raw materials, finding ways in which we can actually convert them into some a form of conversion, convert them into at least semi-finished goods, and then before we export them out of the continent. And the reasons being, if we're able to do that, then we can be able to basically get our young population, which is basically, we have the largest young population in the world, we can get that young population to work, and we now should be able to, get them to a place where we don't have riots every single day on the streets of Africa because young people have nothing to do. Lastly, I think we should be able to also look at our young population and start thinking about basically doing a lot of investments so far as they're concerned. I think there's something to be said about them. If we do the right investments, especially getting young people into technology, into the STEM courses, getting them to be able to involve in science, into engineering, if we are able to prepare them for the job market of the 21st century, getting those who are interested in agriculture, and then those who basically want to be able to create some business, something for themselves. If we're able to invest in those areas and give them the right form of education, I think that in itself will be great. Apart from that, I think that 2020 looked pretty good in the agriculture, in the economic phase of things, and I'm quite excited about that.
Yeah, definitely. I'll be coming back more to deeper into the transformative, digital transformative aspect of it. But then I'd like to get the view of you, Harrison. You have listened to, the opinions of your two other panelists, co-panelists. Now, we saw the role that the young population across the African continent played be it in democratic processes or in, championing for economic diversity, growth and development across the African continent all through this year, from Kenya to Liberia, Sierra Leone, Senegal, and amidst others. We saw the young population actively engaging in things that did matter to their respective countries and in the long run the African continent. How can, as we're moving forward to 2025, how can the African continent leverage on these for the betterment of the African continent, this youthful population that is capable of driving, the continents forward in terms of development and otherwise?
Hang on, just a minute. Something happened here.
All right.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. From Kenya, a lot has happened this year, particularly in the politics and governance space, where key among them all was the Gen Z revolution that sparked in Nairobi and in other cities, where many young people and the entire population were agitating against the finance bill of 2025. And on top of agitating against the 2024 finance bill, other issues like unemployment, wasteful expenditure by the government, unfinished projects, unfulfilled promises were some of the key things that the young people were angry about. And it really took our country to a turning point where the parliament was attacked, the judiciary was attacked, and there were plans where people were saying that they would move to State House because people felt disappointed, they felt disillusioned about their future in their own country. So that, in relation to the question you've asked about tapping on the youth population for African development, I think the young people in Africa, especially our generation, because I'm in that category, has shown that they have the energy and they have the dream of the kind of Africa that they want. And they believe that the generation that is entrusted with working for our future is not doing enough. Rather, it's enriching themselves and not doing the right thing in the offices that they hold. So my observation about African youth and their position in African development is that they feel underled. Their aspirations do not fully reflect on the kind of agenda that the government is pushing. Other than that, although we have had, again this year, many graduates also were turned into the market by various higher learning institutions, universities, technical training institutions. And one of the biggest challenges that still lingers is unemployment, poverty. And that has led to another trend that I think has also been there in Africa, of many young people moving from Africa to foreign countries like Middle East, in Europe, to go and do menial jobs, jobs that are not really what they studied in school or what someone would call a white-collar job or a fulfilling job that a person can do decently and earn a living. So that is also a key thing that has happened not only in Kenya, but also I believe in the rest of Africa, where many young Africans have moved to work as laborers. Actually, there was a mass registration drive by a minister in Kenya, where they're doing mass registration of drivers, recruitment of medical officers, tractor technicians, all sort of laborers. So I think in my observation that they say is a way to create employment for the population in our countries that doesn't have jobs. But I think we still have capacity to create decent jobs in our own countries, because where we are taking people, those are still countries that have been built up by other people who did all the best they could for their countries. In addition to that, we have also had our president at the beginning of the year was the face of Pan-Africanism in our country, and he also proceeded to the United States for a state visit, where that I think was the second state visit in Africa from the one that former president, the outgoing president of Ghana did, the former president of Ghana did many years ago. And the state visit really had some implications on the kind of goodies that we came with back. We had military support, investment, fintech, as Dr. FONGOD mentioned, a lot of investment around fintech, agribusiness, and quite a lot, even women empowerment. So there were a lot of promises and funding that was given to support those programs, not only in Kenya, but also in the East African community. So that is also another highlight that happened this year. And from the president's visit to United States, another concern of the Gen Z revolution was extravagant expenditure by leaders to do things that they could have done with little funds. And that raised questions on why the president used a private jet to go to the United States and the large delegation that was there. So there was a lot of concerns on extravagant expenditure. And I think that cuts across African countries, where many elected leaders do a lot of expenditure on foreign trips, benchmarking, and really posh traveling, which really doesn't give returns on investment to the people. Another key thing that happened was the impeachment of our deputy president in Kenya. That was historical, because since our 2010 constitution, we haven't had any case of impeachment. And this was the first one since our 2010 constitution. So that was also a revolutionary. Is there something, Sharon?
No, please proceed.
Okay, so that was also a landmark event that really shook the country. And currently, the political times are still heated, because he is out there, he's still pursuing his political interests, although we don't know how he is going to come back, because he was impeached. And according to our constitution, once you've been impeached, you cannot vie for an office, or you're not eligible for any public office in the future. So that is still something we are watching. We have a new deputy president who was appointed through parliament. That was that. And also it brought a lot of implications of some senior people being implicated in the Gen Z revolution being questioned about. And also it brings the question on the role of international organizations in the fight for human rights in Africa, because I think that's another key thing that came out this year, where there was, particularly in Kenya, there were several cases of human rights concerns, and a lot of effort and a lot of work was done by the civil society organizations, which were later on accused of being funded by foreign organizations. And that is still a debate and a question to untangle, because these NGOs, in one way, they support fight for justice. In another way, they're being accused of funding activists to destabilize governments. So that is still something to ponder around. And the Gen Z revolution did not end in Kenya. It attempted to spill over to Uganda, but the force that was met, the youth were met with in Uganda was more severe than what happened in Kenya. So it didn't go very far. And we even had cases where the Gen Zs were demonstrating in Nigeria, and the president gave them food to go back home and eat, and they all went back. we are still having human rights concerns in Kenya. Currently, we are having reports about abductions, illegal abductions. And the president a few days ago said that he will put a stop to that. But then there are still accusations that senior people in government are also implicated.
Right.
So we had a conversation here recently about Niger taking over its mines, and we also had the South African role, in the regional bloc. So a lot has happened in Africa, but I think Africa remains resilient on going forward, because the kind of developments that we saw this year, I would say, in a nutshell, are steps towards a prosperous future, because our institutions, even our nationalities, even our cultures have been tested very vigorously in this year, and some of them have stood strong to defend us, and some have to change and adapt to become better in 2025. So that is what I would say. The position of a lot of energy, just back to your question, a lot of energy in these political movements, including in Senegal, have been fueled really by the young generation. And so we are having a shift where the young generation is now taking a lot of interest in national matters and political issues. And as opposed to what used to be happening in the past. In the past, many young people used to stay away from politics and leave it to older people. But I think with time, many young people's eyes have been opened and seen that it is our future that is in the offing. So that is what I would say in a nutshell, is what I would highlight that has happened in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll be, of course, proceeding with this conversation. Just to reiterate that the youth has a lot to offer as far as Africa's development is concerned. Back to you, Dr. NJIX, picking up from where Harrison stopped. You earlier on spoke about democratic progress all through this year 2020 and 24. Now, in a bit to comprehend better, since we're discussing some of the successes as well as loopholes that were recorded. Now, we saw Chad, a country in the Sahel region, that was one of the last to, cut off all military cooperation deals with the former colonial master France. Equally, we saw ECOWAS, after so much time, being able to agree to the withdrawal of the three alliance of Sahel states, that's Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, given them a duration of 6 months. With this said, we equally had a conversation where we highlighted or underlined that this was, a bit of underlining some of the loopholes existing within the regional bloc, but equally we pinpointed a lot of points which were needed to be taken into consideration if it needs to move forward. With that said, with all these changes that have taken place all through this year, especially in this sector where we're seeing African countries, taking a bold stand, cutting off from maybe their former colonial masters, redefining their current partners, and shaping the new stance they intend to take as the world is evolving. How would you relate that to present-day Africa and, of course, charting the way forward for the African continent?
Yeah, in the introduction, I mentioned the three elements of my conversation.
Sure.
And the last one was about the economic sovereignty of Africa. Then when I spoke about the resurgence of Pan-Africanism, of course I was talking about, when we have time, I can talk a little bit about what the 80th anniversary of the Tiaroy Camp massacre in Senegal. It was organized by the government of Senegal on December the 1st. But there is a new, in the context of the resurgence of Pan-Africanism, we see that leaders, some nationalists, some who believe in Pan-Africanism, and even those that we don't see as either nationalists or Pan-Africanists, who are taking some steps in order to affirm the desire to be free, or to expressing the desire to diversify the political and economic partners of their respective countries. But the issue of the presence of the military bases in Africa has become a very important conversation by the civil society during the People's Power movement that we saw in Mali, in Niger, in Burkina Faso, even in Senegal. We saw that people have been taking to the streets to ask the friends and America and the European the military bases in order to leave the continent of Africa, to leave the African soil. Now, when we see the president of Chad doing what he did, it was very surprising, as we know that Chad is a stronghold of French neocolonialism. We were surprised by the way the current president, the son of the former president, did, and then it looks like that he wants to go a little bit further. He had, I think, already is nationalizing the oil sector in Chad. Yeah. So this is the trend by the people in the street, by the African elite, and then by the leaders. So after the president of Chad, the president of Senegal, Diomaye Faye, and even a couple of days ago, the Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko confirmed that Senegal was going to ask all the military bases on the Senegalese soil in order to leave the country, because Senegal wants to affirm its sovereignty. So this is what is happening, and when we analyze Pan-Africanism, we put that in the context of that revival of Pan-Africanism on the continent of Africa. Some are fighting against the CFA franc, some are doing the declassification of archives, some are working on the memorial restoration of Africa, and some are asking the military bases not to leave the continent of Africa. So that is the moment. In that context, we are glad to see how Africans are fighting for their dignity. So I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Dr. NJIX LAGOKE. Now, you equally mentioned the aspect of intra-Africa trade, which I would like to evoke with your co-panelist, Dr. FONGOD. You are an economist, and from an economic perspective, there have been this call for intra-Africa trade, which is in line with the African Continental Free Trade area, to be, intensified on the African continent. And just a few days ago, we saw the Ghanaian president, the outgoing Ghanaian president, Nana Akufo-Addo, that, made an announcement as his parting gift, where he stated that all Africans will now be able to, travel to the West African country visa-free as of January 1, 2025, adding up to other countries on the African continent that do, have this policy of visa-free movement. How important in this, in this era where we're seeing change, we're getting this reckoning across the African continent, what role does these, this movement, this policy we're seeing growing across African countries play in intensifying economic development, and to what extent can technology, be brought into the play to see how it could bring about digital transformation as Africa is headed towards economic development?
First of all, I think that for us to be able to have any kind of a sustainable economic growth on the continent of Africa, we need to be able to be in a place where we fully understand that we have to work together. So having the opportunities where we can be able to trade with each other, which just means that our trading volume increases, and then small to medium-sized enterprises that are in our individual countries will have the unique opportunity to be able to have larger market share. They will be able to trade with other countries, and then also be able to bring employment even in the countries to which it is that they're trading in. We need to be able to encourage this, and I think that being able to have goods and services move freely across the artificial international boundaries we do have on the continent of Africa will actually help us to ride this wave where eventually we will become independent fully as Africans and have this unique opportunity to travel as Africans to any African country without being restricted, and hopefully they will become states and not countries. What I think that needs to happen, especially in the area in which we live in today, is that we need to get a lot of young people involved in tech. The first thing that needs to happen is that we have to find ways in which we are able to get internet connectivity into remote parts of the continent. And also that means we need to also be able to find ways in which we can bring power, because we need power to run a lot of the things that we're trying to be able to achieve so far as the continent is concerned. Without power, it will be extremely quite difficult for us to make any kind of any kind of progress. And so no matter what kind of headwinds we have, what should be able to aid us, it will be extremely quite difficult for us to make any kind of meaningful progress. So power is absolutely important. So while we are talking about technology, we need to be able to start talking about power. How do we generate power? We can be able to do so maybe using our old traditional ways in which we have always done, which is basically by the hydroelectric systems or the hydro dams. That's great. There are great waterfalls, across the continent. And one of the unique advantage with us on the African continent is that we really do not have any rivers on the African continent, that is navigable by boats, and reasons being that most of our rivers are either too shallow or move too rapidly because of the undulating nature, not just of the continent, but that the land rises rapidly, at sea level as we move inland. So we have a cascading or a series of waterfalls, that basically lines most of our rivers. And so if we're able to harness that, I think that we can be able to generate a lot of electricity, but also finding ways in which we can be able to still protect the environment, finding ways in which those who might be displaced as a result of these dams, should be highly compensated, not like what is happening or what is happening in Ghana. We have to find ways in which we really work in this sector, maybe also finding alternative sources of energy. And I think that we have a lot of that on the continent of Africa, especially when it comes to wind and solar. There are vast lands on the continent that should be used for that purposes, and there's no reason why we should not do what is it that is being done in Morocco as we speak. So we need to be able to harness that. Secondly, you're talking about how do we open up, our borders and using technology to be able to achieve that. I really think that in the tech space in which, and the level of technology that is involved around the world, we really do not even need to bother ourselves about if people can travel. We just need to find ways in which we can get people to be connected on the internet and let ideas and services do travel. So you can actually be in any part of the continent of Africa and work in any other part of the continent of Africa without traveling. There are a lot of folks on the continent of Africa that do have international jobs. They work with corporations outside of the continent of Africa, and they are not traveling. They just work, via the internet. What we need actually is to get people connected. The internet penetration on the continent of Africa is extremely quite low. We have to find ways in which we use satellite systems where terrestrial lines cannot reach, where cell phone towers do not have the footprint, so that we can be able to enhance young people and get them, to a place where they can, participate in this global economy, which in more ways has gone digital. So if that was going to be the case, then I think that we will be moving and actually having the kind of technological advantage that we need to be able to bring on the continent of Africa. We are young, as you know, especially in terms of our population, and this is the right time for us to be able to get young people involved in tech. And one of the fastest ways for us to do that is actually to give them the tools that they need. If we are able to increase our internet connectivity, our internet penetrations on the continent of Africa, improve and increase on our footprint, then what that intends will mean is we can now be able to actually get young people to participate in some kind of an e-learning platform and have them to be able to take courses, and even some subsidized courses in institutions that they will otherwise not have the opportunity to even travel to. So we do have this, and I'm sure we have a professor here who, doctor will be able to actually assess to the fact that, how good would it be, that you can actually be able to get a whole lot of young people, scattered across the continent of Africa to participate in top-tier education. In top-tier education, from countries like the United States and Finland and the UK, I think that time has come for us to be able to make those necessary investments in these areas. Lastly, one of the things that I will strongly encourage is this: there's no reason why we should actually sit on the continent of Africa and still have to seek for visa to travel to another African continent, another African country as an African. That in itself is quite shameful. What we need to do is to roll out the red carpet for every African on the African continent to travel to any African country uninterrupted, as long as you're going over there and you're not committing crimes, as long as you're going to these countries and you're not doing anything evil, there is no reason why you should not be allowed to enter. And I think that if we do open up our international, so-called international borders on the continent of Africa, what we do inevitably will be to open up trade. And if that was going to be the case, you'll realize that small to medium-sized enterprises will thrive on the continent of Africa. And if small to medium-sized enterprises begins to thrive, it opens up the market, for a lot of foreign direct investors to come in, and then that just simply means the economy grow. And obviously, if that was also going to be the case, I think that it will bring us to a level where we begin to grow in terms of having other sectors of the economy which have not experienced any kind of growth to begin to experience growth as well. Exactly. Maybe sectors, in the economy like the tourism sector might be able to get a boost as a result of that. And there are very fine, pristine wildlife on the continent of Africa, pristine geographical landforms on the continent of Africa that very few people do know about. And if you just give people the opportunity to travel without having to spend days and weeks upon end looking for visa and then paying for visa to a place that they normally will have to travel to without visa, I think that that in itself will also encourage those of us on the African continent to actually participate in the tourism industry that is on the continent of Africa. Africans should find it easier to travel to a place like Zanzibar, not finding it easier to travel to a place like Dubai. Why should I go to Dubai when there's Zanzibar? Why should I go to Dubai when I can go to a place like Makambuboi? Why should I go to Dubai when there's a place loaded with ancient manuscripts, place like Timbuktu? Why will I be traveling to Dubai when there are these pristine environments, on the continent of Africa that I can be able to go to and just see this beautiful historical landmarks? Even traveling to a place like Giza, going to Egypt, just to be able to be around the pyramids, the land of the pharaohs. Why will I have to go to Dubai if I have the opportunity to travel within the continent of Africa uninterrupted? And what this will also mean is that our aviation system on the continent of Africa will also improve, and reasons being, a lot of people will be traveling so that you don't have to pay an arm to a leg to travel between Lagos and Cameroon and Douala, Cameroon. It's easier to travel between Lagos and Paris than it is to travel between Lagos and Douala. Go figure. That's crazy.
Indeed, and of course it's time for action. We can definitely bring about the change of which we want on the African continent. Back to you, Harrison. You listened to your co-panelist and he stated a lot of points. But meanwhile, we mentioned earlier on that though the African continent has recorded a lot of gains, there were still some challenges across the African continent this year. But nonetheless, how has African nations all through 2024 been able to cope with some regional challenges, and how have they been able to collaborate at a regional level and at a continental level in addressing some of these challenges, like cases of security, climate change, food security, and energy transition?
Okay, thank you. Look, I would say, for example, this year I've been largely involved in climate action initiatives, and we had a cross-national. Actually, it was Global South Conference in Tanzania this year, bringing together activists, advocates, scientists on climate issues to be able to come up with solutions to tackle these issues in our communities, in the marginalized area and all. But as I can say, in that conference, we had people from across the countries, from Cameroon, from South Africa, from Nigeria, all over, from Egypt, Kenya, Tanzania. It was held in Tanzania, the conference itself. So I think this year we have seen, and also having the Kenya actually has done a lot of efforts in terms of leading in the 5 billion trees planting. So that is also in efforts to combat climate change. But now the question that comes up with that such initiative is whether the plants that are being grown are actually indigenous, and if it's not a business, because we have cases of people who are planting trees, but they are investing in harvesting them in the future for timber and furniture business. So that, in terms of climate, we have seen inter-country collaborations where climate initiatives, climate efforts have been advanced by countries, particularly in the East African community. And I can say, while governments have been in the picture in terms of collaborations, more efforts about climate have been done by non-government organizations and individual climate justice activists. So that is also something that we need to check on and ensure that we have governments being actively involved, because a lot of times some of the challenges that we are facing in climate are also policy issues.
True.
And things that need government interventions, like having proper waste management systems, being able to target the polluters and have them be responsible for what they bring to the environment. And so such kind of efforts have not been quite much, because we have still received reports that activists have not been favorably treated in countries like Uganda, where there is still a lot of fight to entrench climate discussions in the picture. And most of these initiatives have been funded by activist organizations like ActionAid, Amnesty International, Greenpeace. So, and additionally, now still in climate, we still have cases where, like this year, we had the law that was put in Kenya against logging being lifted by the current government. And that really brought a lot of uproar, because people now felt like the people who have been given, especially the powerful people who have businesses in timber and everything, it is as if they've been given a permit to cut down trees, because there had been a law that was banning irregular cutting of trees. But now, without the law, we still have a lot of people who are cutting down trees illegally and in a responsible way. Additionally, on climate, we still have a lot of confusion on carbon credit, but fortunately this year, I think not this year, for a long time, the law on carbon credits was overdue in Kenya, and currently the law exists, where now we are trying to bring up carbon credits business into legality, but still there is discontent with the people because it is seen as if we are legalizing pollution by the West, because sometimes it is the West who pollute the most and Africa has to pay. And also the process of this carbon credit business has been challenging to the communities, because we have seen this displacement, particularly in Kenya. We have seen people being displaced from their ancestral homelands because there's a project that is upcoming. Again, outside interests remain a challenge to establish whether they are coming in for good or to make lives more difficult. I'm still trying to figure out what was the next, what was the other aspect apart from climate?
I was asking about food security. We saw countries like, Sudan having issues, and we saw, neighboring countries like Chad, that was like with the Adre border, bordering Chad and Sudan, where we saw this movement of aid coming in through Chad to aid people in Sudan. And other cases have been recorded in a bid to quell this issue of food security on the African continent. We currently have the energy crisis, where we had mentioned sometime this year that Kenya was collaborating with external collaborators to see how they could boost the energy sector so every household could be, alimented. And that has been the same story literally across the African continent all through this year.
Yes, absolutely. We had food security issues in South Sudan and Chad. And the most important thing that is there is that South Sudan still remains in chaos. Just recently, we saw reports that fight had escalated within the systems of government. And it's because most of the anger that is being faced in these countries is because of political instability, because people don't even have enough space to grow their own crops and lead stable, economically sustainable livelihoods. So there, and I think last year there was still a conference in Senegal where people, the presidents, investors, were still talking about Africa feeding itself, and we have not yet reached to the point where Africa can feed itself. As I always say, we have a situation in Kenya where our staple food is maize, and we always have to import maize. We don't have enough for ourselves. I don't know if that is factual or that is, as alleged, is always accused, that people are pushing their own financial interest by creating fake scarcity. But I think Africa still needs us strides to take in terms of how we're going to invest largely in agribusiness.
Okay.
In investing in agribusiness and ensuring that we mechanize our agriculture, but most importantly, ensure political stability in this country so that we can have a conducive environment where, and now coming to agriculture and food security, we have a situation in Kenya where there is currently proposed to be a nationwide vaccination of cows, that they need to be vaccinated. The markets in Dubai are in need of vaccinated cows. And that is something that actually brought a lot of uproar here, because farmers are saying that they don't trust the vaccines. And because a lot of people are speculating that it could be Bill Gates, it could be the animals are being harmed. And again, it brings in, and also we had a lot of fight about GMOs here recently, until we had a law about GMOs also passed. And we have seen the same concerns in Uganda. I've seen documentaries in Uganda where people speculate that chemicals that are harmful are being used in production of food. So while food scarcity is there, again, some food that is in the market is not really very healthy food, because the kind of chemicals that are there that are being sold in the market are not safe. And we had a discussion with the members of parliament and they have actually delayed a lot in identifying and creating a law against illegal farm inputs. So that confusion still exists about, because we saw some very funny headlines that, I don't know, the waste from cow dung, the carbon from cow dung could contribute to climate change. And those are things that people don't understand, while they are actually struggling to put a meal on the table. So that is what I would say about agriculture. We still, like I told you before, I'm with the village. As you can see the background, and the rains have not done well here because food is actually at a very slow growth rate and rains have almost left. So we are still hoping the rains will be back by New Year, but if that proceeds, then we would remain to be hopeful about the long rains in April. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you to Harrison for that in-depth response. Now moving forward with you, Dr. NJIX, having listened to everything Harrison had to say, we mentioned some concrete steps were taken out through this year, like you pinpointed in your previous response, and like was the case with your co-panelists. And we saw a CEMAC meeting. This question is somewhat twofold. We saw a CEMAC meeting recently, and the summit actually fell short of actually talking about a new currency coming within the sub-region, replacing the franc CFA. Away from that, we've seen concrete steps. Despite these concrete steps that were taken to, to appease some of the challenges that he'd had on countries within mid, central, western, or every other part of the African continent this year, what steps were really taken to address issues like governance, which has led to, a spurt of coups in recent years? And of course, it has led to, protests across numerous countries. As we speak, we have a nation like Mozambique that is still, reeling from post-elections protests. And away from that, how have have different countries been able to resolve issues of corruption, inequality across different nations across the African continent?
Yes, that's a huge question, but we're not going to. I think we are heading towards the end of the show. I'm going to try and say what I said in the beginning. I heard Boniface and Stanley, they gave some beautiful ideas. Several other scholars, talk about what needs to be done in Africa. Myself, sometimes I talk like that too. But for me, the most important thing in Africa is the promotion of the idea of the sovereignty of Africa. That's if you don't have any political will, and then you have not conquered your sovereignty, all the beautiful things that Boniface and Stanley and many other people talk about, you won't be able to achieve that because of, and I think Boniface mentioned that passing, because of the interference of neocolonial forces in the domestic affairs of Africa. So that is the first thing. Number two, beyond the economic and political and cultural sovereignty of Africa, it is important that those who are working for the progress of Africa work closely, because when you hear Boniface talking, you can see that we don't see the strong connection that is between what is happening in East Africa and what is happening in West Africa. And then our job is to try and connect the different initiatives that are happening, the success stories on the continent of Africa. It's our job to highlight them and connect people so that we can work together as a powerful political mass that can bring some change on the continent of Africa. So in that context, we know, for instance, like I said, that Senegal, they started the political platform, the political agenda. It is based on Pan-Africanism. But the political party that is in power in Senegal, passed it, led by Ousmane Sonko. We are expecting many things from them because they came to power through the democratic means. And then with the organization of the massacre, the terror camp massacre that they put together on December the 1st, I read this morning that there was like a Senegalese or somebody like an African. His name is Lat Dior. He was fighting against the colonial penetration of the French. The Senegalese in Mali, people are trying to replace the colonial names of streets and statues, by the names of artifacts and statues of people who defended the dignity of Africa. As that memorial restoration, we want to see that happening almost everywhere on the continent of Africa, because we need to decolonize. We need to decolonize the mind. We need to decolonize the space, and we need to decolonize the names that all of us, we have Côte d'Ivoire, Cameroon, Niger, Nigeria. It's about time for us to think about the decolonization of the mind, the space, and the names on the continent of Africa. We have to know that the theme of 2025, as adopted by the African Union, is the year of reparative justice.
True.
And then we have to also remember that 2025 is going to be the 50th anniversary of ECOWAS, which was created in 1975. And it looks like Togo is going to host that commemoration of the 50th anniversary of ECOWAS. And then we know that ECOWAS is in a big tension with the Sahel states. So for us, it is about time to see like a serious gathering between the ECOWAS states and the Sahel states for people to try and see how we can come together beyond the discrepancies, the dissensions and tensions, because unity is the law of God, and unity is the present and the future of Africa. It is only through unity that Africa can survive in that world in which might is right. So this is what, and then those who are working in the field of Pan-Africanism need to show more unity, and then we need to level up. We need to work better together, and this is how we can contribute to the promotion of values of democracy. That's why we can see what is happening in Senegal. Values of democracy that we saw it in Ghana. Yes, we can promote all those things, but we need to advance the Pan-African agenda so that we can play a better role in that world that is becoming more and more multipolar. So this is what I can say about about your questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. NJIX. Of course, we're picking up from there. I just noted that this African continent this year has been redefining its stance in as far as global perception is concerned, in terms of culture, heritage, identity, and otherwise. Like you mentioned, Dr. NJIX, that's imperative for Africa to decolonize, Africans to decolonize their minds if they want to take the continent forward. With that said, Dr. FONGOD, what challenges are still hindering this set progress that is already underway, on the African continent, and what is needed for Africa to address these problems?
I think that what Africa needs is for Africa to fully realize that the help they have been waiting for is not coming, and that the one they have been waiting for is also not coming. That the individual they have been waiting for is the same person who is asking the questions, when will the change comes? The reality is that Africa must rise above the shadows of whatever it is that her colonial past is. As long as we keep having this mindset that, we are victims of what happened to us in the past, we will continually, live within that victimhood. And what that will do eventually is that it's going to cause us not to make any kind of meaningful progress. The reality is we must fight. And to fight, we must fight by liberating ourselves and liberating our minds. If man who is liberated in the minds, it does not matter the kind of chains the person is chained with. As long as your mind is loose, you're free. And I think that that's what we need on the continent of Africa. And to lose our minds and liberate ourselves will have to come when we begin to realize that the education of the Negro, the education of the black man, the education of the African is extremely very important. We can no longer allow anybody to tell our story and educate us on the things that we should know. We must be able to grow up a generation of young Africans who are our teachers, who will teach us the story of the African from an Afrocentric perspective and not from a Eurocentric perspective. We must be able to have young people on the continent of Africa who fully understands what it means to be an African. We cannot, at any one particular point in time, allow any young person to graduate out of any of our academic institutions on the continent of Africa if that individual does not know the history of the African. Taught to them by an African, not by a European, an African who also have an Afrocentric mindset, not an African who is Eurocentric in nature. We have to be able to teach African history. We need to be able to teach African development. We have to be able to teach young people on the continent of Africa to love the continent. And I will have to borrow something from Donald Trump, which basically is, America first. I think that we need to be able to have Africa first. There's absolutely nothing wrong in us basically thinking about Africa first. I understand we live in a global village. I understand we are trading with everybody, around the world. I understand we need these relationships. I get it. But what I'm saying is this: we cannot mortgage our cultures, our values, our norms, just so that we can be able to align ourselves economically with the rest of the world. That in itself is absolutely crazy. Our values, our traditions, our cultures is exactly who we are. Let the world align to us. We will not align with the world. So far as our values, our traditions, our cultures are concerned, we have to align with ourselves. I think that if we're able to set the framework to which it is that we believe so much on the continent of Africa, then it will basically push young Africans to begin to work, as hard as they can to make sure that they preserve the integrity, they preserve the glory of the continent of Africa. If there be anything else that reminds me of just how much work is left for us to do, is to be able to think about, the ancestors we've had, men like Kwame Nkrumah, the people whom have literally leveled so hard on the continent of Africa to create an environment where each and every one of us, can be able to see and be proud that we are Africans. I'm talking about those that either were massacred, those that were assassinated by the West, or those that, just died as a result of some civil strife or civil war in their individual nations. I think that time has come for each and every one of us on the continent of Africa to begin to dream, and we have to dream. The idea that we cannot dream of an Africa that basically, surpasses a country, a city like Dubai, to me, that in itself is crazy. We have to be able to dream. We have everything that it takes on the continent of Africa, especially now in this moment in time, to be able to set the pace for development so far as the world is concerned. Number one, cobalt. Number two, lithium. These two minerals are extremely very important for the creation of batteries that EVs, electric vehicles, and most countries that are trying to go green relies on. Yet, those of us on the African continent, we are benefiting nothing from it. If we look at a country like the DRC, where, cobalt is being mined, the whole entire country has not known peace since independence. A place like Goma has become a battlefield for over 125 different militia groups, all of which are sponsored by companies foreign companies from outside the continent of Africa, and obviously other countries as well. So we have to find a way in which we let the African understand that the salvation of the continent is not going to come from outside of the continent, it's going to come from within, which means that what Africa is waiting for is what Africa has. What Africa dreams for is what Africa owns. And what we own is us, the people, the African. These are the folks who have what it takes to be able to shape the future of the continent and nobody else. If we do stand strong and believe and hope and dream that we can be able to change anything else on the continent of Africa, then we need to be able to ask one unique question: who will stand and who is standing? And the reality is, as long as Africans sit, nothing happens. But if we stand, then everything works. What that means is this: we must stand to oppose every form of aggression that comes out from the West or from the East. It doesn't matter which block in the world it comes from. We must stand to be able to define what we want and what we believe and how we want it. We must stand to be able to renegotiate all terms and all contracts that has been done on the continent of Africa, irrespective of what the consequences will be. And we must stand to be able to make sure that there's freedom of goods and services across the continent of Africa, and also that we do have a currency that's ours. That's what it means to stand. As long as we sit and allow everybody else around the world to dictate to us how we live and why we should live, what we do, how we do it, and then and they do that by telling us exactly how we should spend the money that is being given to us in forms of loan. Meanwhile, they drain the whole entire continent dry of our natural resources, to which it is that the loan they give us is the same money that is looted out of the continent of Africa. That in itself is not how we stand. This is how we stand. We stand to decide and tell the rest of the world, this is exactly how we're going to behave, this is exactly what we want, and this is how we're going to do it. We don't need any foreign investments from outside of the continent of Africa. All we need and what we should be able to do, if we were that united, is to leverage our natural resources, create a financial instrument with that, and then be able to trade that financial instrument without destroying our environment with the form of aggressive mining we have taken place on the continent of Africa. That will be a good start. But so far as I'm concerned, I pray and I wish that the African stands.
Indeed, Africa will stand, and that will take time, but it's all about action, concrete action. Now, in some 2 minutes, Harrison, or 1 minute 30 seconds, Harrison, please, could you, in the wake of all these uncertainties that lie ahead for the African continent, what lessons can the world learn from Africa's resilience? So 1 minute 30, please.
Thank you. I think a key lesson that I learned from about African resilience is that no matter how much challenges will be, we'll always stand to be strong, and we'll always win if we are determined to do so. And another lesson that I'm learning is that young people are rising to the occasion to change the African story and be the architects of their future. And another lesson I'm learning is that in governance, things are changing. We have a lot of change in African governance space. For example, we have a lot of young people's aggression. We have a lot of former presidents coming back to government. We have a lot of opposition leaders coming back to government, coming into government. And I think that is something that it signifies change in Africa. We have technology coming into Africa, and that is a great opportunity that Africa can leverage on. So key takeaways going forward is, for all of us as Africans, as Dr. Fongod mentioned, we need to stand and be active actors of our own destiny as Africans, because we have huge potential that has not yet been tapped into. That's what I would say. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Boniface Harrison joining us all the way from Kenya. Now to conclude today's conversation, with you, Dr. GNAKA, you've listened to your co-panelists, and of course, Harrison just, mentioned, while Dr. FONGOD was stating that Africa needs to stand, Africa needs to be able to depend on itself first before collaborating with the rest of the world. Harrison, on the other hand, says Africa is indeed reliant on itself. Africa can become the continent it wants to be. Now, to chart the way forward as we, get into 2025, all through this year has been challenging, but there have been successes. What should be the way forward for Africa?
Thanks for the opportunity. It was a wonderful show. Dr. Roundup and Stanley and Boniface did a great job. They touched upon some aspects, that contributed to really, to the beauty of the conversation. There are 4 things that I want to say, and then I'm going to some of the things. When Stanley was talking, there are things he was saying nice, and I want to help him a little bit. Dr. June Jordan had a nice expression, and that I forgot the title of the book. Obama used that during his campaign. We are the ones we've been waiting for. That's a beautiful sentence that I like, and I think it summarizes what Stanley was talking about, that no one will come from outside to help us. We are the ones we've been waiting for. And then somebody will say, if it is not us, then who? If it's not now, then when? So, okay, that's the first thing. The second thing that I want to add is the importance of education. Stanley spoke about that a little bit, then I want to emphasize that. Senegal, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, that are doing some revolutionary processes. Ghana, that is so excited, that now that, Mahatma Ramani is going to be the leader of the third independence of Ghana. We want to see a change of the curriculum, because you can do everything that you want to do for the economic sovereignty, but as you want to change the minds of the people, it starts with the education. We want to see those leaders, almost everyone on the continent of Africa, are changing the curriculum to teach Pan-Africanism, to teach Afrocentricity, to teach the math, to talk about the great resistance, the history of the great African ancestors, Kwame Nkrumah, Mandela, Thomas Sankara. That is the second thing. And so far, I have not seen that in any of those countries that are talking about revolutionary change or Pan-African change. That's the second thing. Number three, it is about the ECOWAS, the 50th anniversary. There is a concept called Jubilee 2000. That was a movement which was launched at the beginning of the century in England, and then the focus was the cancellation of African countries' debt or poor countries' debt. It is about the remissions of the sins and then the remissions of the debts. I am going to try and see how we can launch that concept in 2025 by asking or trying to lobby our leaders in Africa to understand in the year of reparations, as decided by the African Union, yes, all of us, we will be fighting for reparation, but at the same time, it is about time for African leaders to release some of the people they're keeping in captivity as a good sign to promote governance on the continent of Africa. So that will be the 50th anniversary of ECOWAS. That is something we want to see. We will be talking about that more. Yes, we want reparations by the Europeans, but at the same time, we want African leaders to release some of the people who are in prison and who have been there for 5 years and they did not benefit it, or they did not have the opportunity to go before any court to see if they are guilty or if they are not guilty. So that is a beautiful, that will be a beautiful way for them to increase their credibility about the desire to fight for freedom and justice and to fight for reparation. The last thing, as I was talking about, Stanley was talking about values of Africa. And then the last thing is that We, friends and I, we've been promoting Pan-Africanism, and then we think that there are several concepts on the continent of Africa, but if there is one concept which is very charismatic, thanks to some very important historical factors, it is the Ubuntu philosophy. So we think that Ubuntu philosophy should be the pillar for the new dispensation of Pan-Africanism. And out of the 2,000 languages in Africa, we have between 600 and 900 Bantu or Bantu languages. In Kenya, in Cameroon, in South Africa, in Ghana, in Nigeria, almost everywhere, we have the same concept with some variations. If the same way the European rally around liberalism or around capitalism, or some around Confucianism, or some around communism, that is the same way we can rally about the Ubuntu philosophy that could be the pillar for an integrated development of Africa, for the new disposition of Africa, and then also for the decolonization of the mind, the spirit, and also for the restoration of the African memory. Thanks.
Thank you to Dr. NJIX for other concluding statements. Meanwhile, we say thank you, Dr. NJIX LAGOKE, Dr. Stanley FONGOD, and Harrison for taking out time to be able to participate on today's edition of Talking Points over For You Media Africa for this roundup of the year 2024. Meanwhile, we have come to the end of today's conversation. We say thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being through with us all through this journey, all through this year 2024. And given this is the last edition, I'll say wishing you a happy new year 2025 in the company of Just Programs on For You Media Africa. Bye-bye.